So welcome to the next video in our series of SketchUp tutorials. In this series, there will be a three-part series of videos. I'm going to attempt to show you the way I draw the wedged half-dovetail joint in SketchUp. It's a beautiful joint, perhaps the strongest joint in all of timber framing, and I use a different method to draw this than I use for other joinery. Instead of using the paste in place function, drawing the tenon first and then pasting it into create a mortise, I basically draw the mortise first on its own. And there are the main reason I do this is because the shop drawings are a little more clear when you do it this way. So I don't do all of my drawings like this, but for some special joinery I do. So in this first video, we're just going to learn how to draw the mortise. And so our mission will be to connect an 8x12 tie beam to an 8x10 post with a wedged half dovetail tension joint. And the basic steps that we're going to follow are we're going to draw a simple 2-inch by 12-inch mortise in a post. That we're going to start off by drawing a post as well. Then we're going to push that mortise through. Then we're going to draw an angle on the bottom of the mortise that has a slope that represents an 1.5 inch change over the 10-inch width of the post. This will be for the bottom of the dovetail tenon that's going to come in there. Next, we will draw the angle on the top of the mortise, which will represent the slope that changes 1 inch over 10-inch. That's going to accommodate the wedge that gets put in the top. Once we've done that, then we'll draw diminished shoulders that will be 1.25 inches in from the inside face of the post. And this will accommodate the bottom edge of the tie as it sits on that shelf, if you will, of the post. And then there's going to be some cleanup of some unnecessary lines that will help make the shop drawings a little more clear. So there are some important considerations to keep in mind with this. First of all, although the timbers we used for this joint were eastern white pine, we used a hardwood wedge. We did 4 of these joints in a recent frame, and some of the wedges were white oak and some of them were cherry. But we also have some in ash. Basically, any hardwood species works. In our model, the wedge is driven from the outside face inward, and there's some debate about that. Some framers drive them from the inside, and then they feel that they can continue to drive that tighter as the joint dries. I chose to drive them from the outside. I also chose to draw the wedge 4 inches longer than the width of the post. So the post is an 8x12. I'm sorry, a post is an 8x10. So the wedge would be 4 inches longer than that. So a 14-inch wedge, which allows it to extend 2 inches on both faces of the timber, and that gives us plenty of length for it to feed through, but also to drive it nice and snug. Let's see. And then another consideration that we did is we cut a small chamfer on the top of the mortise on the inside face of the post. And that helps prevent blowout of the wood fibers as you're driving the wedge. So I have some images to show you. So first off, this will be the first step that we're going to do. It's the simple through mortise that's 2 inches wide and goes 12 inches through the post because the post is 12 inches thick. There are some dimensions there that you can take a screenshot of this and follow if you choose. The next step is to draw the angled slope of the bottom part of this that will accommodate the bottom of the dovetail from the tenon. And so that's this angle right here. This dashed line represents the original level of the 2-inch by 12-inch mortise. So in this second step, we're basically just cutting this section out. And then in the third step, we're going to cut this section out that will accommodate the wedge. This dashed line represents the original 12-inch, 2x12-inch top of the mortise, and then it extends out here. So this is the next step that we do, and it's important that you follow this sequence. Once we've drawn the mortise itself, then we're going to create this 1.5 inch angled reduction. This is sometimes referred to as a diminished haunch. you want to have bearing surface on the bottom of this. So that'll be the third step that we do. Some folks draw this as a full, straight recess, but we prefer to angle them. So this is the finished product in a frame we recently did. You'll see that the tie beam is an 8 by 12. The post is an 8 by 10. Bottom of the tie shoulders in 1 1/4 inch. The wedge is driven from the outside face inward, and you'll notice that the tenon is actually cut a little bit short of the outside surface of the post. So we draw the model full scale, but then when we cut this joint, we actually cut this about 1/4 inch to 3/8 shy of the line, because as this dries, this post will shrink inward more than the tie beam tenon will shrink. So if you cut them at the same level, then eventually as it dries, you're going to have some bulging in your siding. So that's just a little tip as you're cutting that joint. Here's an unassembled version of this. So you can see the bottom of the dovetail. This bottom part goes in here, and then the wedge would come in from the backside at the top. And this is important that you see these dashed lines. So dashed lines are lines that are not cut. They're just there to help you visualize the joint. And that's really helpful when you're trying to make sure that you're cutting where you're supposed to be cutting. So we would erase those. After the joint was assembled, we'd sand those off and stain the timber. This represents the little bevel cut that we do on the inside of the post. We just take maybe 1/4 inch or 3/8 inch of material out with a chisel, not a specific angle, but just a little bit of an angle, so that when you drive that wedge, you don't have this face of the timber blowing out. This is the model that we want to end up with. So we have the post, which is an 8 by 10. We have the tie beam, that is an 8 by 12. And then we have a hardwood wedge coming in from the backside. So before the wedge goes in, this tie beam slides in and drops down into place, and that provides the room that accommodates the wedge. One of the things I would like to point out is this is not drawn specifically for square roll layout. We used plain timbers on this, so you can see in this we have the full length of the timber. We didn't house this, we didn't do a 1 inch reduction here, which if you were using unplaned timbers, you'd need to do that. But that's as simple as just before you draw any other joinery, you take an account for that inch reduction or 1/2 inch, whatever you choose to do. So this is the X-ray vision or X-ray view of what the post will end up with. You have the mortise that's beveled on the bottom and beveled on the top. From the inside face outward, the bevels go down and up. So it's wider at the top and bottom than it is in the front. You may wonder what this 1.33 inches represents. We lay this out so that this comes out along this plane at 1.5 inches up. But once you remove this material, because this is angled, that reduction ends up being about 1.33 inches from where that actually comes out after you've removed this material from this little shelf here. Don't get yourself too concerned about that. It's not something you actually need to measure. It happens when you cut the joint. This representation shows where we would have pegged it. This joint in a lot of frames does not even require pegging, because the wedge holds it in place. And if the joint is cut correctly and with precision, the wedge is going to cause the tenon to bear on the bottom of the mortise along the bottom edge of the dovetail. And that's secure enough to hold that together. Although we often will put pegs in place as well. It's sort of the belt and suspenders approach, right? You're just adding more structural redundancy to it. And this is our ideal peg layout based on the dimensions of this particular model. So let's go to SketchUp and see how we draw this. So first of all, this is the actual model in SketchUp as a finalized model. So we could pull this out, and we could pull the wedge out if we chose to. So that's the exploded view. So now let's go to a new SketchUp page and see how we're going to draw this. So I'm going to start off by drawing a post that is an 8 by 10 post. So I'm going to come here, pull out a rectangle. Oops, let me back up for just a second. I got to change my dimensions here. It's in meters and I want it in inches. So let's get rid of that. Okay, so we're going to pull this out as a rectangle. So I want it to be 10 inches by 8 inches. And I want this post, I'm just going to make this post 10 feet tall. So I'm going to take my push-pull tool, make it 10 feet. And then I'm going to save this as a component. Very important. So I triple click it, then right click, make component. Post. And then in order to modify this, in order to draw that mortise, I need to open that model to make any changes. So I'm going to triple click it. My next step is I need to make a guideline that represents the bottom of this joint. And I'm going to choose it to be 8 feet up from the bottom. So I click there and I drag up and I go 8 feet, enter. This is going to become what I refer to as the known. So it's sort of like the basis for where you're pulling all your measurements from. This is going to represent the line where the bottom of the tenon sets on that diminished shoulder. And we call that the known because all learning starts at knowns and proceeds to the unknowns. One of our philosophies here at Big Beams Timber Frames. So I've located that. Now I'm going to pull some more guidelines. And you'll notice if I come out here, I can't really grab that guideline because I've opened this, this component. So I'm going to just kind of come in here. And now I can grab it, click on it, and then start dragging upward. And I'm going to make another guideline 1.5 inches up. Then I'm going to make another guideline 12 inches up. And a third guideline, I'm going to make 13.5 inches up. Next thing I'm going to do is, because I want this mortise centered on this post, this is an 8-inch post. It's going to be a 2-inch mortise, and I want it centered. So that means there's 6 inches remaining of my timber. So I need to go 3 inches in from either side. So 3 inches there. And then I'm going to come over here, grab that, and go 3 inches. Notice how the green line is there. That tells me I'm pulling it along that face. Another thing you could do is you could kind of just overlap one of these, and that kind of locks it in on the same plane. So I'm going to type 3 inches again. And now what I've done is I've created a rectangle or some guidelines that it's going to allow me to make my initial mortise. So the initial mortise is going to be just a straight through mortise that's going to go from this 1.5 inch line up to the 13.5 inch line. So I'm going to come over and grab my rectangle tool and start here, click and drag up to here and let up. And then with my push-pull tool, I'm going to push that inward. And once it starts going in, I'm going to type 10 inches. And then that allows me, see, that gives me a through mortise. And you can see it as I rotate it. And it doesn't extend out the backside. It's just a simple through mortise. And that's what we want at this point. So the next thing we're going to do is, I mentioned that there is we call this our known. I'm actually going to draw a line over top of the guideline. So I have that there. Now I'm going to rotate to the back side of this post because a lot of my remaining work is going to happen there. And I need to create, basically I need to make this, to make the bevel that goes from this surface downward to the back side. So I need to be able to locate where I'm starting from. So I'm going to go back to my guideline tool. I'll come up here and click this and just see how that snaps to it. Boom, right there. And I have that X. That's what I want. That's going to help me to lay out my initial line for that. And the other thing I'm going to do is I'm going to do that same thing for the top of this one. Now I'm going to rotate that around. And now I can bring this guideline down here to that. And I want to come down 1.5 inches from that. Now, remember, this has to be open in order for me to make these changes. So the next thing I'm going to do is I need to drop this down to meet this line and then connect it to this edge. I'm not going to lower the front edge of that mortise. That front edge is going to stay where it is, but I'm going to draw a bevel on the bottom edge. So now that I have my guidelines to show me where that is, I still need guidelines to come in here. Oops. And then to come in here. So I'm going to use my line tool, and this is really important. Now I'm going to click here, and then over here, and now I have to go into Xray mode. So I'm going to go View, Face Style, Xray. This is really useful when you're changing models around. And I now need to connect a line where I just drew this lower part from there out to here. And then I also need to do the same thing from here out to here. Once I've done that, now I start cleaning up some lines. So I'm going back to my select tool. I'm going to get rid of this line. And that has made my angle. But in my model, there's still these other original horizontal lines, and I don't want those to show up in my shop drawing. So I'm going to delete that. It's really important that you're just clicking on what you want to delete. So in this case, we have drawn our 1.5 inch bevel on the bottom. So now the next thing is we need to draw an 1-inch tall bevel on the top. So I'm going to come out of Xray mode for just a moment. And I'm going to create, click outside here. I want to make sure that my component is open. And I'm just going to drag this up. Well, actually, I have a guideline there. This next one is only going to go 1 inch up. So not 1.5 inches. And that was not what I wanted. Let me undo that. I need a guideline at the top of this. Okay, so now I can pull this up 1 inch. Now I'm going to, again, create this little box here. I'm going to go back into Xray mode. And I need to connect these lines. So I need to go from here to there. And from here to there. Then I can come in and delete that line. And then I go in and I delete these lines just to clean this model up. I'm going to come out of Xray mode. I'm going to delete my guides. And you see we have our mortise drawn. We have our known. We have our through mortise, and we have, let me go to Xray View again, and you can see what we have here. So the next thing is we need to draw this diminished shoulder. So I'm going to go out of Xray, and I'm going to reopen that by triple clicking it. I'm going to come down here and get my guideline, and I'm going to come over here and get my guideline. And now I want to come in 1.25 inches from that face. And so as long as I'm dragging on that line, I'm good. Or if I just go right to the far side and it says 10, that's fine. I'm going to type in 1.25 inches. Need a guideline at the top of this. So I have to come over here and put a guideline. And then I come down and get a, oops. Get a guideline there. So I now want to draw lines from here into there, and it's important that you see that X. And then from here, I'm going to come up to this, and that's angled. Now that I've done that, I can push-pull that. Now, I can't go all the way through because that mortise is there, but I've done one side. I'm going to come over and do the other side. So again, I'm going to pull a guideline down to there, pull a guideline down to there, pull a guideline in 1.25 inches. And I'm going to draw a line that goes from here, which represents my shelf. And then this angled line up to here. And then I'm going to pull that in. Now I have this remaining and I can push that out. But now I have to do some cleaning up. And it's really just a matter of selecting this, get rid of that line. I'm going to get rid of this line. Whoops, I don't want to get rid of that face. I want to get rid of, whoops. Just want to click that line and that line, this line, that line. Whoops, don't want to get rid of that face. Let me undo that. Get rid of that line, and let's get rid of this line here. And then finally, get rid of that line. I'm going to delete guides. And you can see I've drawn, let's go into Xray. So we have drawn the mortise with bevels on the bottom and the top. The bottom bevel drops 1.5 inches. The top bevel goes up 1 inch. And we have created the 1.25 inch shoulder for that. So we could come in here and we could put dimensions on here. That's 1.25 inches. We could even come back here where, you would actually want to be like 8 and 7 or 8 3/4 from the backside for square rule layout. So there you have it. This is the way to draw this is first step in drawing the wedged half dovetail joint in SketchUp. In the next video, I will show you how to draw the tenon on the tie beam.